James Thornton's hands shook as he gripped the edges of the wooden podium. Camera flashes lit up his weathered face like lightning in a storm. The small community hall in Oaksville, Alabama, was packed with people who either hated him or didn't trust him. Some were both. At 52, James didn't look like a monster. With his graying hair and simple blue suit, he could have been a store manager or a high school teacher. But for 20 years, he had been something else entirely, a regional leader of the Ku Klux Klan. "I stand before you today," he began, his voice rough with emotion, "to say I was wrong. Everything I believed, everything I taught others to believe, was wrong." Whispers spread through the crowd. In the front row, civil rights activists watched with narrowed eyes. They had seen false apologies before. In the back, three men in work clothes, men James had once called brothers, glared at him with pure hatred. A woman from the local reporter raised her hand. "Mr. Thornton, you spent decades spreading hate. Why should anyone believe you've changed?" James swallowed hard. 6 months ago, you would have spat at her feet for questioning him. Now he nodded slowly. "You shouldn't believe me right away," he said. "Words are cheap. That's why I've given the Southern Justice Coalition all the information I have on active Klan members in 3 states. Names, meeting places, planned activities." He paused as the room erupted in surprise. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm trying to undo some of the damage I caused." Pastor Williams, a black minister known for his work in the community, stood up next. "What caused this change of heart, Mr. Thornton? You were at an anti-integration rally just last year." The real answer burned in James's throat. It was a phone call on a Tuesday evening, a voice he hadn't heard in 7 years. His daughter Rebecca saying, "Dad, I need to talk to you about something important." But James couldn't share that yet. Rebecca's life was private. She didn't want her connection to him public. "I had what some might call an awakening," James said instead. "I started questioning things, reading books I would have burned before, listening to people I was taught to hate." A reporter from a national news channel pushed forward. "Are you saying you no longer hold racist views?" James gripped the podium tighter. "I'm saying I'm working on it. Every day. This isn't like flipping a switch. I had poison in my mind for decades. Getting it out takes time." As the questions continued, James caught sight of a young black family slipping into the back of the hall. The father held a little boy about 5 years old. For a moment, James's voice faltered as a pain shot through his chest. No one in this room knew that 6 months ago, James Thornton had discovered he had a grandson with brown skin and curly hair. A beautiful boy he had never met because of his own hateful beliefs. After the press conference, James walked quickly to his truck, ignoring both the reporters chasing him and the death threats muttered by his former Klan brothers. His phone buzzed in his pocket, a text message from Rebecca. "I saw your speech online. It's a start." James sat in his truck for a long time, staring at those 5 simple words. A start. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, but a possibility. After decades of spreading hate, after 7 years of silence from his only daughter, it was more than he deserved. He started the engine, knowing that the hardest part of his journey wasn't behind him, it was still to come. The old wooden house where James Thornton grew up still stood at the end of a dirt road. As a boy in the 1970s, James would sit on the front steps and wait for his father to come home from work. Even now, 40 years later, he could remember the smell of motor oil and cigarettes that followed his father everywhere. James parked his truck and stared at the house. He hadn't been back here in years, not since his parents died. But after the press conference, he felt pulled to this place where it all began. Inside, dust covered everything. James walked slowly through the living room, touching the old furniture his mother had been so proud of. On the wall hung the photo of his father in a white robe and hood, standing tall like he was something special. "You taught me well, Pop," James whispered to the empty room. His father, Bill Thornton, had been a proud Klan member. Every Saturday night, men would gather in their barn to talk about protecting their way of life. Young James would listen from his bedroom window, taking in every word. "The world's changing," Bill would tell his son while cleaning his hunting rifle. "People want to mix everything up. That's not how God made things." James was just 10 when his father first took him to a Klan meeting. He remembered how important he felt, being included in this secret world of men. When they lit a cross on fire, the flames reflected in his father's eyes. That night, his father placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "This is your heritage, boy. Don't you ever forget it. At school, James kept to himself. The white kids whose parents weren't in the clan stayed away from him. The few black students at his school crossed to the other side of the hallway when they saw him coming. James told himself he didn't care. He had something they didn't: purpose. When James was 17, he met Sarah at a county fair. She was pretty and quiet, with long brown hair and soft eyes. She didn't ask questions about his family or what he did on Saturday nights. 2 years later, they were married. Their first child, Michael, was born a year after that. James remembered holding his son, feeling proud that he was carrying on the Thornton name. 2 years later came Rebecca, fierce from the day she was born. Their youngest, Thomas, arrived 3 years after that. Sarah never joined the clan. She would go quiet whenever James put on his robe. But she didn't stop him either. She cooked dinner for clan members when they came to the house and washed James's robe when it got dirty. Rebecca was different from the start. Even as a little girl, she asked questions that made James uncomfortable. "Why don't any black kids come to our house?" she asked when she was 7. "Because they're different from us," James had answered. "Different how?" she pressed. "They just are, Rebecca. That's how God made things." As Rebecca grew older, the questions got harder. By high school, she was bringing home books that made James furious. Books about civil rights and equality. They fought almost every day. "You're brainwashed by those liberal teachers," he shouted during one fight. "And you're blinded by hate," she shot back. The day after her high school graduation, Rebecca packed her bags. Sarah cried at the kitchen table while James stood in the doorway, too proud to ask his daughter to stay. "Where will you go?" Sarah asked through tears. "Chicago," Rebecca answered. "I got a scholarship." She looked at James one last time. "Goodbye, Dad." For 7 years, that was the last word his daughter had spoken to him, until the phone call that changed everything. James locked up the old house and walked back to his truck. The sun was setting over the trees, turning the sky blood red. In his pocket, his phone buzzed with another message from Rebecca. "Let me know when you're ready to talk about what happens next." Rebecca Thornton's apartment in Chicago was small but filled with light. Books lined the walls, and colorful art hung everywhere. It looked nothing like the home she had grown up in, and that was exactly how she wanted it. At 32, Rebecca had built a good life for herself. After finishing law school, she had joined a civil rights law firm. Her work helping people fight discrimination made her feel like she was fixing a small part of the damage her father had done. On this cold morning, Rebecca sat at her kitchen table, staring at her phone. Beside her sat Marcus, her partner of 5 years. His hand rested gently on her shoulder. "You don't have to call him," Marcus said softly. "I know," Rebecca replied. "But Dr. Mills said family members are the best chance for a match." 3 weeks earlier, Rebecca had gone to the doctor for what she thought was just extreme tiredness. Instead, she learned her kidneys were failing due to a genetic condition. She needed a transplant. Her mother, Sarah, had been tested first. She wasn't a match. Her brothers Michael and Thomas weren't matches either. That left only one person in her family. Rebecca picked up the phone and dialed the number her mother had given her. It rang 4 times before a gruff voice answered. "Hello." Rebecca took a deep breath. "Dad, it's me, Rebecca." The silence that followed seemed to stretch forever. "Rebecca." His voice sounded different than she remembered. Older, uncertain. "I need to talk to you about something important," she said, the words coming out in a rush. They spoke for 20 minutes. Rebecca explained her medical situation, careful to share only the facts. James asked questions about her treatment, his voice growing more concerned with each answer. "I'll get tested," he said finally. "Just tell me where and when." Rebecca hadn't expected him to agree so quickly. "Thank you," she said stiffly. After hanging up, she leaned into Marcus's embrace and cried for the first time since her diagnosis. 2 weeks later, Rebecca's phone rang. It was the hospital. "Miss Thornton, we have good news. Your father is a match." Rebecca closed her eyes. She should feel relieved, grateful even. Instead, she felt a knot of complicated emotions. Her father, the man who had taught hate around their dinner table, was now going to be the one to save her life. When she called to tell him, James was quiet at first. "I'll need to come to Chicago," he said finally. "Yes," Rebecca replied. "The surgery will be at Northwestern Memorial. They'll need you here for at least a week." I'll be there, he promised. After hanging up, Rebecca looked around her apartment. Photos of her and Marcus covered the refrigerator. Books about Black history filled the bookshelf. And in the spare bedroom, toys were scattered across the floor, toys belonging to their adopted son, Elijah. Rebecca hadn't told her father about Marcus or Elijah. Her father's racism had been the core of his identity for as long as she could remember. How could she tell him that she was building a life with a black man? That they were raising a child together? We should tell them before he comes, Marcus suggested when she shared her concerns. Rebecca shook her head. If I tell him, he might change his mind about the donation. I can't risk it. So what's the plan? Hide Marcus and Elijah in a closet while your father visits. Her friend Lisa asked over coffee the next day. No, Rebecca said firmly. I'll tell them about Marcus when he gets here, but not about Elijah. Not yet. As the days passed, Rebecca prepared for her father's visit. She put away most of the photos of Elijah and arranged for him to stay with Marcus's parents during the day. At night, when her father would be at his hotel, Elijah could come home. It wasn't ideal, but it would work, or so she thought. What Rebecca didn't know was that her careful plan was about to fall apart in ways she couldn't imagine. James Thornton felt out of place in Chicago. The busy streets, tall buildings, and crowds of people from all backgrounds made him nervous. He clutched his small suitcase tightly as he walked from the taxi to the hospital entrance. For the past week, he had told his Klan associates he was visiting a cousin in Tennessee. None of them knew he was traveling to Chicago to donate a kidney to the daughter who had walked away from him 7 years ago. The hospital lobby was busy with people coming and going. James stood still, watching doctors and nurses of all races working together. In his world back in Alabama, this kind of mixing rarely happened. Dad? James turned to see Rebecca standing a few feet away. Her hair was shorter than he remembered, and she looked tired, but her eyes were still as fierce as ever. Rebecca, he said, his voice catching. Neither moved to hug the other. Instead, Rebecca gestured toward the elevators. My doctor wants to meet you. As they rode up to the 5th floor, James tried to find something to say. Your mother sends her love, he finally offered. Rebecca nodded but said nothing. Dr. Mills was a kind woman with gray hair and a warm smile. She explained the donation process in detail, how they would remove one of James's kidneys and transplant it into Rebecca. The surgery carries some risk for you, Mr. Thornton, Dr. Mills warned. And the recovery can be painful. I understand, James said firmly. She's my daughter. Dr. Mills nodded. We'll start the final tests today. If everything looks good, we'll schedule surgery for the day after tomorrow. After the meeting, Rebecca showed James to the hospital cafeteria. As they sat with their coffee, an awkward silence fell between them. Your law practice is going well? James asked finally. Yes, Rebecca answered. I work mainly on housing discrimination cases. James looked down at his coffee. The irony wasn't lost on him. His daughter fought against the very kind of discrimination he had spent his life supporting. A tall black man approached their table. James tensed automatically, a reaction built over decades. James, this is Marcus, Rebecca said, her voice tight. My partner. James froze. In his world, partner had only one meaning when a white woman used it to describe a black man. Marcus extended his hand. It's good to meet you, Mr. Thornton. For a moment, James didn't move. Then, slowly, he reached out and shook Marcus's hand. You can call me James, he said stiffly. Marcus sat down next to Rebecca, his hand resting protectively on her shoulder. I want to thank you for doing this, he said. It means everything to us. James nodded, not trusting himself to speak. His mind was racing. His daughter was living with a black man. Everything he had taught her, everything he believed in, she had rejected completely. Over the next 2 days, James watched Rebecca and Marcus together while pretending not to. He saw how Marcus brought Rebecca her favorite tea, how she leaned against him when she was tired, how they communicated with just a look. It reminded him of how he and Sarah had been when they were young, before the Klan meetings and arguments about Rebecca had built a wall between them. The night before the surgery, James lay awake in his hotel room, his thoughts in chaos. He had been raised to believe that relationships like Rebecca and Marcus's were wrong, dirty even, but there was nothing dirty about how they cared for each other. For the first time, James allowed himself to wonder if everything he had believed was wrong. The next morning, as nurses prepared him for surgery, James felt calm. Whatever happened, he was doing the right thing for once in his life. "We'll take good care of you both," the nurse assured him as she wheeled him toward the operating room. James nodded. "Just make sure my daughter is okay," he said, surprised by the tears that suddenly filled his eyes. "She's all that matters now." 3 days after the surgery, James sat in a wheelchair by Rebecca's hospital bed. The doctors said both surgeries had gone well. Rebecca was already showing signs that her body was accepting his kidney. "You should go back to the hotel and rest," Rebecca told him. "You look tired." James shook his head. "I'm fine right here." Marcus had gone to work that morning, promising to return with dinner. For the first time since arriving in Chicago, James and Rebecca were alone together. "Why did you agree to do this?" Rebecca asked suddenly. "After everything that happened between us." James looked down at his hands. "You're my daughter," he said simply. "No matter what." Rebecca watched him closely. "Even though I'm living with a black man?" James flinched slightly at her direct question. "I'm trying to understand," he said carefully. "Marcus seems like a good man." "He is," Rebecca said firmly. A nurse came in to check Rebecca's vital signs. When she left, Rebecca's eyes were already closing. "I think I need to sleep for a while," she murmured. "I'll be here," James promised. As Rebecca slept, James thought about the past week. Meeting Marcus had shaken him deeply. The man was everything James had been taught to hate: educated, successful, and black. But he was also kind, clearly loved Rebecca, and had treated James with respect he didn't deserve. When Marcus returned that evening with food, he found James dozing in the chair and Rebecca still asleep. "Why don't you go back to the apartment and shower?" Marcus suggested quietly. "I brought the spare key. I'll stay with her." James hesitated. He hadn't been to Rebecca's apartment yet, having gone straight from the airport to the hospital. "She'll be fine," Marcus assured him. "The doctors say she's doing great." Finally, James agreed. Marcus gave him the address and a key. Rebecca's apartment was on the third floor of an old building. Inside, it was warm and welcoming, much like Rebecca herself. James looked at the photos on the wall: Rebecca at her law school graduation, Rebecca and Marcus hiking in the mountains. In the bathroom, James found fresh towels laid out for him. After showering, he felt better than he had in days. As he walked back to the living room, he noticed a door that was slightly open. Thinking it might be the guest room where he could rest, he pushed it open. Instead of a guest room, he found a child's bedroom. Colorful pictures covered the walls. Toy cars were lined up neatly on a small shelf. A stuffed bear sat on a blue blanket. James stood frozen in the doorway. Rebecca didn't have a child. She would have told him, wouldn't she? On the dresser sat a framed photo. James picked it up with trembling hands. The picture showed Rebecca and Marcus with a small boy between them. The child, maybe 5 years old, had light brown skin and a bright smile that reminded James of Rebecca when she was young. As he stared at the photo, he noticed a paper on the dresser. It was a school form with the name Elijah Marcus Thornton at the top. Thornton. This child had Rebecca's last name. This child was his grandson. James sat heavily on the small bed, still holding the photo. His mind was spinning. Not only had Rebecca built a life with Marcus, but they had a child together, a child Rebecca had hidden from him. He understood why, of course. How could she tell her clan leader father that she had a mixed-race child? James looked again at the boy's smile, so much like Rebecca's. This was his blood, his family. The sound of keys in the front door made James jump. He quickly put the photo back and stepped out of the room. Marcus stood in the living room, looking uncomfortable. "Rebecca wanted me to check on you," he explained. "Who's Elijah?" James asked directly. Marcus's face changed. "She didn't want you to find out like this," he said quietly. "Is he my grandson?" James pressed. Marcus nodded slowly. "We adopted him 2 years ago. He's your grandson in every way that matters." Back in Alabama, James sat alone in his kitchen. 2 weeks had passed since the surgery in Chicago. 2 weeks since he had discovered he had a grandson he had never met. The conversation with Marcus that night in the apartment had been difficult. Marcus explained that Elijah had been adopted when he was 3 years old. His birth parents had died in a car accident, and he had no other family. Rebecca wanted to tell you, Marcus had said, but she was afraid of how you would react. James understood her fear. The old James, the clan leader, would have been disgusted at the idea of his daughter raising a black child. He might have said terrible things that could never be taken back. When James returned to the hospital the next day, Rebecca knew something had changed. "You found out about Elijah," she said. There wasn't a question. James nodded. "Why didn't you tell me?" Rebecca's eyes filled with tears. "Because I was afraid you would reject him, and I couldn't bear that." They hadn't spoken much about Elijah after that. When James left Chicago, Rebecca had simply said, "I need time to think about what happens next." Now, back in his empty house, James had nothing but time to think. His body was still healing from the surgery, giving him an excuse to stay away from clan meetings. When members called to check on him, he kept the conversations short. One night, James drove to the local library. The librarian, Mrs. Jenkins, looked surprised to see him. Everyone in town knew who James Thornton was and what he believed. "I need some books," he said quietly. "What kind of books?" she asked. James hesitated. "Books about civil rights, and maybe some books about adoption." Mrs. Jenkins's eyebrows shot up, but she didn't comment. She led him to a shelf at the back of the library and left him alone. James checked out 3 books that day. Over the next month, he came back for more. He read about slavery, segregation, and the civil rights movement. He read stories written by black authors about their experiences. He watched documentaries on his small TV, learning about a history that was very different from what he had been taught. The more he read, the more ashamed he felt. The hatred he had carried for so long began to feel heavy and wrong. At the next clan meeting, which James attended to avoid suspicion, things felt different. As the men discussed plans to protest a new community center in the black part of town, James found himself speaking up. "Maybe we should leave them alone," he suggested. "They're not hurting anyone." The room went silent. Dave Miller, who had been in the clan with James for 15 years, narrowed his eyes. "What did you just say?" James shrugged, trying to look casual. "I just think we have better things to do with our time." After the meeting, Dave cornered him in the parking lot. "What's going on with you, Jimmy? Ever since you got back from Tennessee, you've been different." "I'm just tired," James lied. "The surgery took a lot out of me." Dave didn't look convinced. "Some of the boys are talking, saying you're going soft." That night, James wrote a letter to Rebecca. He told her about the books he was reading. He told her he was sorry for the pain he had caused her. At the end, he added a sentence that was hardest to write. "I would like to meet Elijah someday, if you'll let me." He sealed the letter but couldn't bring himself to mail it yet. On Sunday, James drove to a different church than the one he usually attended. This church was smaller, and the pastor was known for preaching about love and acceptance. James sat in the back row, not making eye contact with anyone. The sermon that day was about forgiveness, not just forgiving others, but forgiving yourself for past mistakes. As the pastor spoke, James felt tears running down his cheeks for the first time in years. After the service, he drove straight to the post office and mailed the letter to Rebecca. 3 weeks after James mailed his letter to Rebecca, his phone rang. He answered quickly when he saw his daughter's number. "I got your letter," Rebecca said, her voice guarded. "I meant every word," James told her. There was a pause. "I believe you're trying," she said finally. "But words are easy, Dad. Actions are what matter." James thought about this for a long time after they hung up. She was right. He had spent decades spreading hate. A few books and a letter couldn't undo that damage. The next day, James searched online until he found the number for the Southern Justice Coalition, a civil rights organization based in Birmingham. The woman who answered was suspicious when he explained who he was. "Why would a clan leader want to talk to us?" she asked. "Because I want to make things right," James answered simply. 2 days later, James sat across from Antoine Wilson, the director of the coalition. Antoine was a tall man with kind eyes and a serious face. "So do you want to publicly renounce the clan?" Antoine said, studying James carefully. "Why?" James thought about lying, about giving some vague answer about seeing the light. Instead, he decided on the truth. "I found out my daughter is raising a black child with her partner. My grandson." James's voice broke on the last word. "I want to be part of their lives, but I can't if I'm still the person I was." Antoine nodded slowly. And you're willing to expose clan activities. Names? Meeting places? Everything I know, James confirmed. The next week, James stood at a podium in the community hall, cameras flashing as he publicly renounced his past. Afterward, he answered questions from reporters for almost an hour. When asked what had caused his change of heart, he was careful not to mention Rebecca or Elijah. I started seeing people as people, he said instead. As he walked to his truck after the press conference, he felt something hit his back. Turning, he saw a rock on the ground and 3 of his former clan brothers watching from across the street. "Traitor," one of them shouted. James got in his truck and drove away without responding. He wasn't surprised by their anger. He had expected it. What he hadn't expected were the phone calls that came in the days that followed. Death threats left on his answering machine. A brick thrown through his living room window with a note that read, "We know where you sleep." Antoine Wilson advised him to stay with friends for a while, but James had no friends left. The white community saw him as a traitor, and the black community didn't trust him yet. One evening, as James cleaned up the glass from another broken window, his phone rang. It was Rebecca. "I saw your press conference online," she said. "You did?" "Yes, it was." She hesitated. It was a good start. James felt a small spark of hope. "I've been getting some threats," he admitted. Rebecca was quiet for a moment. "Are you safe?" "Safe enough," James lied, not wanting her to worry. After they hung up, James moved his mattress to the floor in the hallway, away from any windows. He slept with a baseball bat beside him. The threats continued for weeks. James found the word "DID" spray-painted on his truck. His mailbox was destroyed. Someone called his boss at the factory, and James lost his job. Through it all, he kept going to the different church, kept reading his books, and started volunteering at a community cleanup day in the black neighborhood. Some people there looked at him with suspicion, others with curiosity. A few even thanked him for what he had done. "It can't be easy," an older woman told him as they picked up trash together. "Standing up against your own people." "They're not my people anymore," James replied. "I'm not sure who my people are now." The woman nodded thoughtfully. "Sometimes you have to be alone for a while before you find where you really belong." That night, James got another call from Rebecca. This time, her voice sounded different, almost warm. "I have something to ask you," she said. It was a cool autumn day when James arrived in Chicago for the second time. The trees in the small park near Rebecca's apartment were painted in bright reds and yellows. James sat on a bench, nervously checking his watch every few minutes. 3 months had passed since his public renunciation of the Klan. 3 months of threats, broken windows, and lonely nights. But also 3 months of small steps forward. The Southern Justice Coalition had helped him find a new job in Birmingham, an hour from his hometown. He had given 2 more interviews about his change of heart, and had even spoken to a church group about the dangers of hate. And now, here he was in Chicago, waiting to meet his grandson for the first time. He saw them before they saw him, Rebecca and Marcus walking hand in hand, with a small boy between them. Elijah wore a bright blue jacket and red sneakers. Every few steps, he would jump into a pile of fallen leaves, making Rebecca laugh. James stood as they approached, his heart beating faster than it ever had before. "Dad," Rebecca said, stopping a few feet away. She looked healthier than she had in the hospital, her cheeks pink from the cool air. "Rebecca," James replied, then nodded at Marcus. "Marcus." All 3 adults stood awkwardly, unsure of what to do next. It was Elijah who broke the silence. "Are you my grandpa?" he asked, looking up at James with curious eyes. James felt his throat tighten. "Yes," he managed to say. "I am." Elijah studied him seriously. "Mommy said you live far away. That's why I never saw you before." "That's right," James said. "I live in Alabama." "Where is that?" Elijah asked. "It's a long way south from here," James explained. "Where it doesn't get as cold in winter." "Do you have a dog?" Elijah wanted to know. James smiled despite his nervousness. "No, I don't. Do you like dogs?" This simple question opened a flood of conversation from Elijah about dogs, cats, and a classroom hamster named Mr. Whiskers. As Elijah talked, the adults relaxed a little. They walked through the park together, Elijah running ahead to collect special leaves and rocks. After a while, Rebecca fell into step beside James. He's a wonderful boy, James said quietly. Rebecca nodded. He is. Thank you for letting me meet him, James added. It was time, Rebecca replied. But I need you to understand something, Dad. Elijah is my son, mine and Marcus's. We're his parents in every way that matters. If you want to be part of his life, part of our lives, you have to accept that completely. I do, James said firmly. I'm not the man I was, Rebecca. I'm trying to be better. Rebecca looked at him for a long moment. I believe you're trying, she said finally. They found a playground, and Marcus took Elijah to the swings. James and Rebecca sat on a nearby bench, watching them. I brought something for you, James said, pulling a small photo album from his bag. Rebecca took it cautiously. Inside were old photos she had never seen before, pictures of her grandmother as a young woman. I found these when I was cleaning out the attic, James explained. There's something you should know about your grandmother. She wasn't like my father or me. During the 60s, she secretly helped black families who were being harassed in our town. My father never knew. Rebecca looked up in surprise. How did you find this out? Mrs. Bennett at the library told me. Her mother was one of the people Grandma helped. Rebecca turned the pages slowly, looking at the grandmother she barely remembered. Why are you telling me this now? Because hatred isn't our family's only legacy, James said simply. There's good in our history, too. As the afternoon ended, they walked back toward Rebecca's apartment. Elijah, tired from playing, asked to be carried. To everyone's surprise, he reached for James. Carefully, James lifted his grandson into his arms for the first time. The boy rested his head on James's shoulder, completely trusting. Will you come back again? Elijah asked sleepily. James looked at Rebecca, a question in his eyes. She hesitated, then nodded slightly. We'll talk about Thanksgiving, she said. Maybe you could visit then. It wasn't forgiveness, not completely. It wasn't the end of James's journey, but as he held his grandson close, feeling the small boy's heart beating against his own, James knew it was something just as powerful. It was a beginning.